During the exhumation of a 1945 military coffin, forensic specialists discovered that the body inside wasn't human at all, but something they couldn't identify. The family had mourned for 80 years, only to learn that whatever was buried beneath their loved one's headstone was never their son. The single dog tag found in the casket belonged to someone who was still alive. Dr. Eleanor Morris stood motionless beside the open grave, her gloved hands trembling slightly as rain pelted the tarp covering the excavation site. 20 years as a forensic anthropologist had prepared her for many things, but not for this. The cemetery was silent except for the soft patter of raindrops and the occasional whisper among the small group of officials gathered around the disturbed earth. What began as a routine exhumation requested by the family of Private First Class James Harrington had turned into something that defied explanation.
"I need everyone to step back," Eleanor said, her voice wavering, "and someone call the Pentagon, now!" The exhumation had started normally enough. The Harrington family had requested their ancestors' remains be moved to their family plot after discovering military records suggesting their relative might have been misidentified during the chaotic final days of World War II. A simple DNA test would confirm if the body belonged to their fallen soldier. But when the casket was finally raised from the wet earth and the lid carefully removed, Eleanor's blood ran cold. Inside lay something that resembled a human body in military dress uniform, but upon closer inspection, the proportions were wrong. The limbs were too long, the joints bent at impossible angles, and the preserved skin had an unusual texture that Eleanor had never seen in her extensive career. Most disturbing was the face. Features too symmetrical, eyes set slightly too far apart, with no signs of decomposition, despite nearly 8 decades underground. "This isn't human," she whispered to her assistant, who promptly turned away and vomited onto the cemetery grass. When Eleanor carefully searched the personal effects in the coffin, she found only one item of identification, a single dog tag bearing the name Thomas J. Sullivan. A quick check against military records revealed something impossible. Thomas Sullivan was still alive, 99 years old, and residing in a veterans' home in Massachusetts. The rain fell harder as Eleanor examined the body further. The uniform was authentic 1945 issue, perfectly preserved, but the body inside seemed almost mummified in a way that contradicted known science. The tissue didn't feel like flesh. It was dense, fibrous, almost like plant material, yet structured like muscle and bone.
Most disturbing were the strange markings along what should have been the spinal column, symbols that looked neither like tattoos nor natural formations. News of the discovery spread quickly through government channels. By nightfall, the cemetery had been sealed off, surrounded by military personnel and unmarked vehicles. The Harrington family, who had waited decades for closure, were instead met with stern-faced officials who asked them to sign non-disclosure agreements and informed them that the exhumation was now a matter of national security. Dr. Morris was escorted to a hastily established laboratory in a nearby military facility. The strange body was transported in a specialized containment unit, monitored by silent men in hazmat suits. Inside the sterile room, Eleanor was joined by Dr. Maxwell Reed, a government pathologist whose presence at such scenes usually indicated matters beyond ordinary forensic work.
"I've never seen anything like this," Eleanor admitted as they prepared for the examination. "Have you?" Maxwell didn't answer immediately. His eyes looked tired, haunted even. "There were rumors during the war," he finally said, "reports from the Pacific Theater about strange recoveries, bodies that weren't quite right. Most were dismissed as war trauma or misidentification." "This isn't misidentification, Max. Whatever this is, it's not human." The preliminary examination revealed even more disturbing anomalies. X-rays showed a skeletal structure with extra joints in the limbs. The skull contained cavities where human sinuses should be, but much larger and connected by channels that served no recognizable biological purpose. The rib cage protected not recognizable organs, but what appeared to be a complex system of sacs and fibrous tissues. "These aren't decomposed human organs," Maxwell whispered. "They were never human to begin with." As they worked through the night, Eleanor noticed something else disturbing. The tissue seemed to be reacting to their presence, almost imperceptibly contracting when touched, despite being supposedly dead for decades. When a sample was placed under a microscope, the cells appeared to be in a state of suspended animation rather than death, with structures unlike anything in known taxonomy. By morning, military officials arrived with specialists from various classified departments. Among them was an elderly man in a wheelchair, Thomas Sullivan himself. The 99-year-old veteran's eyes widened with recognition when he saw the body, though he hadn't been told what was in the examination room. "That's it," he whispered, his voice quavering. "That's what we found in the cave." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the elderly veteran. "You've seen this before?" Eleanor asked gently. Sullivan nodded slowly. "Okinawa, 1945.
Our unit was clearing caves when we found them. There were 3, not alive, not dead, just waiting." The military officials exchanged glances, and one stepped forward. "Mr. Sullivan, you never reported this in your debriefing." The old man's laugh was hollow. "Would you have believed me? They told us to forget it happened, said it was war stress, but they took them, the bodies, said they would be studied." His rheumy eyes fixed on the corpse. "That's why my dog tag is there. They wanted identification with each specimen. I thought they were destroyed decades ago." As Sullivan spoke, one of the laboratory technicians monitoring the tissue samples suddenly cried out. On the digital display, the cells had begun to change, metabolic processes awakening after decades of dormancy, triggered by air, light, or perhaps something else entirely. "It's responding to his voice," Dr. Reed said in disbelief, watching the readings spike whenever Sullivan spoke. The implications were staggering. Whatever this entity was, it had been placed in an American military coffin in 1945, buried under the name of a fallen soldier with the dog tag of a living one. Someone had deliberately hidden this non-human body in plain sight, in consecrated ground where it would remain undisturbed. But what was even more disturbing was the evidence that it wasn't entirely dead. The military quickly expanded the containment protocols. Everyone present was required to surrender all recording devices and personal effects. Additional security arrived, including specialists from departments whose names were never spoken aloud. Eleanor found herself signing document after document, each threatening more severe consequences than the last for disclosing what she had seen. "We need to know exactly what this is," insisted Colonel Harris, the senior military officer now overseeing the situation. "And we need to know if there are more of them." According to Sullivan's fragmented recollections, his unit had discovered 3 entities in that Okinawan cave. Military records showed that 3 unidentified soldiers had been buried in similar ceremonies in 1945, one in Arlington National Cemetery, one in the cemetery they had just exhumed, and one supposedly interred in a military cemetery in the Philippines. The Arlington grave was relocated during renovations in 1972, one of the intelligence officers reported. The casket was empty when they moved it. A chill ran through the room. One entity was here, one was missing, and one remained buried halfway across the world. Eleanor's examination continued under increasingly strict supervision. The tissue samples had stabilized but continued to show signs of impossible metabolic activity. Carbon dating of the uniform confirmed it was from 1945, but attempts to date the biological material yielded contradictory results. Some tests suggested it was decades old, others indicated it was much older, and some equipment simply malfunctioned when processing the samples. 3 days into the examination, Eleanor made another discovery that sent shockwaves through the team. Embedded deep within the fibrous tissue that composed the entity's chest cavity was a small metallic object, roughly the size of a walnut. It was geometrically perfect, a dodecahedron with each face covered in minute engravings too small to read with the naked eye. "It appears to be some kind of device," Eleanor reported, her scientific mind struggling to find rational explanations. "It's generating a weak electromagnetic field." When they attempted to X-ray the object, all equipment within 20 feet immediately shut down.
When power was restored, the monitors displayed the same geometric pattern for 3 seconds before returning to normal, a pattern that matched nothing in any known language or mathematical system. That evening, as Eleanor was reviewing her notes in the secure facility where all research staff were now required to remain, she was approached by an elderly woman in civilian clothes, accompanied by 2 military escorts. The woman introduced herself simply as Dr. Elizabeth Weir, offering no institutional affiliation. "You've done remarkable work, Dr. Morris," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of secrets, "but I'm afraid your involvement ends here." "What? Who authorized this?" Eleanor demanded. "This situation falls under a protocol established in 1945, Weir explained calmly. "What you've discovered isn't new to some of us."
The entities were originally classified as non-terrestrial biological specimens recovered during wartime operations. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "You're saying these are—" "We don't use that term, Dr. Morris. The simplistic concepts of aliens, popularized by entertainment, bear little resemblance to the complex reality. What matters is that in 1945, a decision was made at the highest levels to conceal their existence. The 3 specimens were placed in military coffins and buried with honors to ensure they would remain undisturbed." "But why? And why use real soldiers' identities?" Dr. Weir's expression remained impassive. "Because no one questions a military burial. No one exhumes war heroes without exceptional cause. It was meant to be permanent." Before Eleanor could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in an ominous glow as security personnel rushed past them toward the laboratory.
"What's happening?" Eleanor asked, but the look on Dr. Weir's face suggested she already knew. They arrived at the laboratory to find chaos. The entity, which had shown no signs of mobility or consciousness during days of examination, was now partially upright on the examination table. Its limbs moved with unnatural fluidity, joints bending in impossible directions. The eyes, previously dull and lifeless, now reflected the emergency lights with an inner luminescence. Most terrifying was its mouth, open now in what could only be described as a silent scream, revealing not teeth but concentric rings of fibrous material expanding and contracting rhythmically. 2 security guards lay unconscious on the floor. The remaining staff had retreated behind a containment shield, watching in horror as the creature continued its impossible animation after 80 years of apparent dormancy. "It's been awake the whole time," Dr. Weir said, her voice betraying emotion for the first time. "It was just waiting." The entity's movements became more coordinated by the second. The metallic object in its chest cavity now pulsed visibly beneath the thin layer of tissue covering it, emitting a low-frequency hum that made everyone's teeth vibrate painfully. "Containment Protocol Omega," Dr. Weir commanded, and the military personnel immediately began evacuation procedures. "Wait!" Eleanor protested. "We need to understand what's happening." "We've tried understanding them before," Weir replied grimly, "in 1947 and in 1972 when the first one escaped. Some things aren't meant to be understood, Dr. Morris. Some things are only meant to be contained." As they were hurried from the facility, Eleanor caught a final glimpse of the laboratory through the observation window. The entity had fully risen now, its proportions even more disturbing when animated. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, limbs too long, head slightly too large for its frame. It was examining its own hands with what appeared to be curiosity, running elongated fingers over the preserved uniform it still wore, the uniform of a country not its own, from a war it had nothing to do with. Then it looked up, directly at Eleanor, and she felt something impossible, a presence in her mind, alien yet unmistakable. Not words, but concepts flooding her consciousness, awakening, transmission, reunion. The facility was evacuated within 30 minutes. From a monitoring station a mile away, Eleanor watched on screens as the building was locked down, sealed from within by automated protocols. No one explained what would happen next,
but the grim faces of those who knew suggested nothing good. Thomas Sullivan was the last to be evacuated, his wheelchair rushed across the compound by 2 soldiers. As he passed Eleanor, he grasped her arm with surprising strength. "It called to the others," he whispered, his eyes wide with the same terror he had felt in that Okinawan cave 80 years earlier. "I heard it in my head. It called to the others." Within an hour, all civilian personnel were being processed for transport. Eleanor found herself facing Dr. Weir one last time as she was about to board a military helicopter. "There are 3 questions that have haunted us since 1945, Weir said, looking suddenly every one of her considerable years. First, were they a naturally evolved species, or were they created as biological vessels for something else? Second, were they left on Earth accidentally or placed here deliberately? And third, most importantly, when the others receive the signal that has now been sent, how many more will come?" The implications of those questions were still sinking in when Eleanor felt the ground shake beneath her feet. Behind them, a plume of smoke rose from the direction of the facility, followed by the concussive wave of an explosion, the containment protocol's final solution. "Too late," Weir said quietly. "It's already gone." In the weeks that followed, Eleanor found herself relocated to a research position at a nameless government facility. Her previous life had been neatly packed up and moved, her communications monitored, her movements subtly restricted. She was now part of something she never asked to join, the keepers of a secret that stretched back to World War II and perhaps much further. Military records were quietly amended. The grave in the cemetery was refilled and marked with a new headstone, honoring the same fallen soldier, but now bearing the correct date of birth. The Harrington family received confirmation that their ancestors' remains had been positively identified through DNA testing, along with a generous stipend for their patriotic sacrifice. No mention was made of what had actually been found in the coffin. Thomas Sullivan passed away 3 days after the incident, officially from natural causes. His military record was updated to include previously unrecognized honors, ensuring his burial at Arlington with full military honors. And in a military cemetery in the Philippines, a 3rd grave remained undisturbed, for now. Eleanor's new assignment focused on analyzing the limited data they had managed to gather before losing the specimen. The metallic object had emitted a signal just before the entity escaped, a signal directed not toward space as might be expected, but toward the Earth's core. Ground-penetrating radar at various sites around the globe had since detected anomalies at depths previously thought to be solid rock. Cavities where no cavities should exist, some showing faint signs of electromagnetic activity similar to what they had measured in the laboratory. Most disturbing was what they found when they sent a remote probe to examine the grave in the Philippines. The coffin was still there, but it had been opened from within. Whatever had been buried there was gone. As Eleanor reviewed satellite imagery showing thermal anomalies in remote regions, each corresponding to reported 19th century meteorite impacts that had long been dismissed as misidentifications, she couldn't help but wonder, how many more were there? How long had they been here? Buried not just in military cemeteries, but in the earth itself, waiting through the centuries, or perhaps millennia, for some signal to awaken them. And what would happen when they all answered the call? 6 months after the exhumation, Eleanor was reviewing seismographic data when an alert flashed across her screen. A minor earthquake had been detected near the original cemetery where it all began. Satellite imagery showed something impossible, the Earth moving in a pattern that resembled not geological activity, but deliberate excavation. When military personnel arrived at the site, they found 30 graves had been disturbed from below. Each coffin had been opened, not from above, but from beneath. The earth pushed upward, as if something had emerged from much deeper and passed through the graves on its way to the surface. Whatever had escaped from the laboratory was no longer alone. Others had answered its call, not from space, but from within our own planet, where they had been buried long before humans began interring their dead. The war graves of 1945 had only been their most recent hiding places. How many more remained, sleeping in Earth's dark places, waiting for their time to awaken? Have you ever wondered what else might lie beneath the cemeteries you walk past every day? What ancient entities might be using our burial grounds as their hiding places?
Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden histories that governments don't want you to know. Remember, sometimes the most terrifying truths aren't found in horror stories, but in declassified military documents and forgotten wartime testimonies.